Hello everyone, welcome to CodeRageXI. My name is Ray Konopka with Raize Software, and today we're going to go over the new Windows 10 controls that are available in Rad Studio. Specifically, I'm going to focus on the 5 controls that were introduced in Seattle. So if you have Rad Studio Seattle or Rad Studio Berlin, you have these new 5 controls that have been inspired by Windows 10. It's important to note that these controls are native VCL controls. They do not require Windows 10 in order to operate, so you can run them on Windows 7, Windows 8, so forth. They are built entirely in the VCL component technique, so they don't rely on extra DLLs or anything else like that. But they're designed, inspired by Windows 10 controls. One, to give your applications a little bit more modern look and feel, to implement certain functionality that is quite common in Windows 10 applications. But beyond that, even if you're not interested in going to Windows 10 from a look and feels point of view, some of the functionality that's available in these controls is actually quite powerful and can help enhance your user interface to give you some advantage over traditional techniques. And so I have demonstrations for each of these different controls for us to get a feel for just how we can use them and how powerful they can be. So to start, we're going to take a look at the activity indicator, and it's an animated rotational display that shows us that something's going on in our application. And this technique's been around for a while. You certainly have seen it in Windows 10 if you're using that, or even Windows 8. But the old technique that we would do would be to, say, have an indeterminate progress bar, and the progress bar would go back and forth, and it takes up a lot of space. It's not very visually appearing, and most users look at that and have no idea what that means. And so having a more defined activity indicator is a good way to provide feedback to your user to let them know that there is indeed something going on, but not necessarily we don't know when it's going to finish. And then from a controls point of view, there's a variety of properties that we can set and change in order to get the effects that we're looking for. Now, all of the applications, the demo applications that I'm going to be showing, are actually included with Rad Studio. They're part of the public documents, Embarcadero Studio. I'm using Berlin, so it's under 18, but if you're using Seattle, you would find it under 17, and under the samples directory is what I have listed down there at the bottom. And specifically, we're going to go into the Object Pascal VCL directory structure to find the various samples that I'm going to be showing in this presentation. And so we're going to start with the activity indicator. So let me switch over to Rad Studio and we'll take a look at what that does. So I've created I have a test little VCL app plus some of the other applications we'll look at. And I just wanted to first start with, let me navigate to my Windows 10 controls here. Component palette, and I'm just using the Raize palette menu to navigate there. You can get that off the Raize.com website. And here are the 5 controls that we're going to be looking at. And the first one here is the activity indicator. We go ahead and drop that on our form, and it doesn't look like much, and it's fixed in size. If I try to resize it, it goes back to a fixed size, and that's just because of how it was designed. And there's a number of properties that we can see. Well, one, do we want to animate it? And then whether there's what indicator color we're using, the size, and the type. And the default is it's a medium size. It's using black momentum dots. And if we turn on the animation at design time, we can even see what that looks like. And you might recognize that very clearly from what you see in Windows 10 during startups and other things like that. But to make it a little bit easier, let's go and take a look at the activity indicator demo program. And this essentially shows us quick ways to make all the various changes. So let me go ahead and run this. And go ahead and animate. We've already seen this is the default, so momentum dots and the size, and I can change from small, medium, large, and extra large. So it's 24, 32, and 48 and 64 different sizes. And then I can change that between using white or black. White's not that great there. I can switch to using the rotating sector. Again, give us a different view, or a sector ring where it fills in the displays appropriately. I can also change various colors. I can change the speed at which it does its animation. Full support for themes. So if I were to change this to the Windows theme, maybe I'll change that to white. And again, you can see that it's transparent. It picks up the colors. Really powerful way of looking at that. Go back to the momentum dots, and we can see that effect. So great little control. Nice to get a new way of seeing some activity indicators. The next control is a toggle switch. It's a clickable control, in some ways a lot like a checkbox, if you will, but it's a way to toggle between an off and an on state. We can, of course, set the colors. We can set captions that are associated with it, and alignment. And the easiest way is to take a look at the actual control. So if we go back over to here and go into our little test and then drop our toggle switch, and then we can see that it's pretty straightforward. Looks like a toggle switch. This is becoming much more common to combine a switch-like effect so that you can more visually distinguish between whether it's in an on or an off state. So Windows uses this quite a bit in various settings applications. Of course, mobile devices are quite familiar with this, so transferring that metaphor onto the desktop apps in the VCL does make quite a bit of sense. And there's abilities to change. If we look at the properties here, we can change the captions and the caption properties, so whether or not we show that caption or not. The state captions, of course, have special properties for those. This is nice if you need to localize this. And of course, they're driven by resources, and so we can say inactive. And again, the control adjusts its size based on what properties there. You can change the state between on or off, and you can change even the orientation that's there. So let's go to the toggle switch demo, which is very similar, except I've got the pre-built settings all available to me when I run this. So let me go ahead and switch to that. And again, so we can toggle that on or off. We can change the settings that I did before, change the various values inside of each of these. So to get that particular look and feel that you want, we go with a darker blue color there. Oh, that's not very attractive, is it? Here, I'll go some red and blue there, little Cubs colors. Change your alignment, so if you need to change that, what side the control shows up. Read only makes you can't change it. Of course, enabled states are available as well, and the captions. And finally, you certainly want to be able to support the different frame styles. So here's our Iceberg Classico. If we go and change this, say, to the blue, here's an example where it's picking up the VCL styles to get the effect that we want. So it's got a little rounded circle, and it changes the colors based on the state. Again, really powerful way of doing for settings. A little bit more visually clear than a traditional checkbox. Next, we have a T search box. So this is more of a visual representation. It's essentially an edit control with an embedded button, and we had those before. However, this is a little bit more specialized with that. One, because the button has a specific purpose and can be toggled between two different searching mechanisms. And then, of course, there's other abilities to control the size of the button and what that looks like. So let's take a look at the control. In this one, there isn't much in the design interface that we don't see in our sample app. and that is we have the search bar at the top here, and then we can control whether it's showing text searching or audio searching, which is something that's becoming a little bit more common inside of Windows 10 in particular. Now the control itself doesn't do any audio searching, but from the mechanism, if you wanted to toggle that and support it, you could capture the audio using the Windows 10 API and put that information in to the control to be able to visually represent that. The key thing here is that as you were to type something, so if I were to type in CodeRage, I can either hit enter as I do now, and the onInvoke search method gets called with the text that's in the control, so it gets passed to it. You can also do the same thing by clicking on it. Of course, we can change the orientation. If you're using right to left languages, you want to be able to put the button on the other side. Changing the audio changes the indicator that's there, and then enter key no longer works. As we said before, there's enable disable state, and then Windows styles are supported. So changing to the Classico, each style now has these indicators, the text search and the audio search in them. So we can switch over to the Windows and notice they changed the angle of that. The audio microphone looks a little bit different, and so again, it's all built in for us to utilize in our applications. The next control that we're going to take a much deeper look at is the relative panel. This is one of the new exciting controls that were introduced for Windows 10 support. And it's a container control like a panel, but it allows you to control the child control's positions relative to the panel itself or to other child controls that are in the panel. And this is one of those areas where actually the Rad Studio Help is very important, and we're going to take a look at that in just a little bit. But first, we're going to take a look at the relative panel and just what it can do for us. So switching over, let's start back in our little test form here. Before showing the demo, because it's actually a little bit easier to understand how the relative panel works by looking at the design environment first, just because of some of the techniques that were used to make the relative panel do its magic. And so what I've done is I've just dropped a relative panel. And again, it's just a regular panel, so it has all the same capabilities that you would expect to see. We can align it, we can change the beveling, the coloring, and all of that. But then I'm going to change to the standard palette here. And to start, we're just going to drop an edit and a button. And we've all made forms where we align the buttons, to our edits, and we might have multiples of them, and we can go and move that around. Of course, we have to resize it. When we resize it, we're constantly finagling with our interfaces to get them to do what we want. And again, the designer guidelines are good, but it'd be nice if we could just make things work. Just connect things together and make them work. So to start, let's look at the edit one, and just as an example of what we can do inside the relative panel. So because edit one is inside relative panel, it gets a whole bunch of new properties associated with it. And so at the end of the object inspector, there's all these new properties that are associated with it. So we have the first set are all having to do with the panel. So it's alignment of this control based on the relative panel that it is part of. And then the remaining controls are ways to associate other controls within the panel. Let's say we wanted to horizontally center this edit box with the panel. So we can go ahead and change that. And what this does is no matter where I move it vertically, the horizontal position will always be centered to this panel. So that's kind of neat. I can also go and make it go with align top of the panel so that it always will be in that one spot. Likewise, I can change it to be left with the panel and be vertically centered with it. You might be thinking, well, can you make it align left with the panel and align right with the panel? And yes, you actually can. But to do things to make it counteract might be a little odd. Like I want to align centered with it and be left. And so the left in this case doesn't take any precedence. And we're going to see why that happens a little bit later. But let's go and kind of keep things simple again. And we're just going to position edit 1 right here. And the key is I want to position button 1 to be right next to my control. And so let's go and look at button 1. And we're going to, instead of aligning with the panel, we're going to align and say that this is to the right of edit 1. And so no matter where edit 1 goes, that button will be to the right of it. Well, that's kind of silly. Let's make it exactly where we want it to be. So button 1 selected, and we want to align that vertically centered with edit 1. And so now wherever we move this, that button snaps to be in that same correct spot. If you want to control the spacing that's between this, you can do that. That's actually handled by the margins. So the relative panel uses the margins of the controls to handle that. So if I go and make this 20, because the left margin of the button, then it adds that space in between there and keeps that separate. So again, that's something to keep in mind if you want to control the spacing between various things. So some other things, now let's say I've got this, and of course I go to my panel here and I align it left with the panel. All right, well that's good, but what if I were to align this with the right of the panel? What would you think that might happen here? Well, it's what you kind of thought might have happened. The button is off of the view because it is possible to get things out of the view based on the settings that you've made. And so the panel ones take precedence, and the panel move the edit over there, and it just so happened that you had a button that was positioned to the right of it. So you need to keep that in mind as you move things around. So let's extend this a little bit further, and let's drop a couple more edit boxes down. And the intent here is I want to put edit box, underneath edit 2 under 1 and edit 3 under 2. So let's see how we can do that real simply. We're going to say that edit 2 is below edit 1, but we also want to align left with edit 1, and we want to align right with edit 1. And so that it goes exactly where we want it to. We can do the same thing with edit 3. Align that to edit 1 and align that to edit 1, left and right, but we want to make this below edit 2. So now as I move this around, all the controls are there. And if I resize edit 1, because edit 2 and 3 are relative to edit 1, they pick up the same change. So really nice once you make that connection to make adjustments to get what you wanted. So let's take this a little bit further. What if we wanted this button to span all the way down to edit number 3? So if we go to button 3 here, or button 1 there, go to the bottom, and we aligned it vertically centered. Well, let's get rid of that, and instead we'll align the top with edit 1, and we'll align the bottom with edit 3. So it looks like the button is doing what we want. However, if we go to move this and we move this up higher, we see that the button didn't really shrink. If we bring that down, it's a little odd in what it's doing, and if we move it completely horizontal, then it works out correctly. And this is a good point for us to bring up that Rad Studio Help that I was talking about, because whenever you run into odd behavior, it's a good way to check to see what some of the limitations are or constraints that you need to be aware of. So let's bring up the Rad Studio Help for the relative panel. And specifically, we want to look at this link using the relative panel. And what this describes for us are some important rules and how the relative panel figures out which controls should go where. And first thing is the precedence of your alignment rules. And so any of the panel related alignments always happen first. So if a given control is aligned with the panel, that is what will take precedence. And then within that constraint, centering always takes precedence over left and right, which was why when we centered the edit box in the display, and we centered this, and we also set the alignment to the left. The alignment to the left had no impact, and that's exactly what we saw in that case. So if we horizontal center align, the edit box gets centered, but if we do left with panel, it does nothing because the center one takes precedence. Switch back over to here. Then once those are handled, then all of the individual alignments are managed. So aligning relative to other controls, and again centering always takes precedence, and then left takes precedence over right and top over bottom, and typically that is how you would structure things. So that's where those alignments come into play. Likewise, side-based alignments, so above, to the left or right or below, are then finally done at the end. And what this last comment here, the order of the children, determines how controls are processed. And that's exactly what we're running into in this example. When I make this taller, notice the current position of edit 3. It's down at the bottom. So then when I let go, the button 2, or I should say button 1, is the second button in the list of controls on this. So the edit 1 gets moved first. Button 1 tries to get moved, but since it's based on edit 3 hasn't moved yet, and that's why its bottom is the bottom. So how do we fix this? Well, it's very easy. You go into the structure pane and find the control collection for the relative panel, and then just drag the button down after all of the dependencies that it might have. So once I put it after edit 3, this means that edit 1 will move. Edit 2 figures out relative to edit 1 and wherever else it's set up to, and then edit 3 does the same, and then finally the button says to align itself to the top of edit 1, the bottom of edit 3, and it will do it correctly. So as I move this around, everything is set, although I'm still vertically centered. So let's get rid of that. Or I should say horizontally centered. Now as I move this around, it does what I would expect it to do. Okay, let's go back and take another look at some of these other items that are in here. We already talked about the out of sight alignment. So again, if your control disappears, you probably have one of those side-based alignments in play and it's moved off the screen. However, another situation you can run into is mistakenly picking the relative. So instead of, like, say, edit 3, and instead of making it for edit 2 and I mistakenly set edit 1, we will see that it disappears, or at least edit 2 disappears. It's again based on the Z order which one will be visible. Button 1 resized itself to be correct. It's doing exactly what we told it to do, but what happened to button 2 or edit 2? That's because it's sitting right behind edit 2 because we've set up our properties incorrectly there. So if you're missing something, those are the things to look at. 1, have you shoved something off screen? Or 2, have you connected it to the incorrect control? And then circular dependencies. There's nothing that would prevent you from doing circular dependencies. So it tries to be very efficient in figuring out what needs to be related to one another. It will stop. It won't go down that road. So you won't get into trouble that way, but it may not do what you're expecting it to because you've put in a dependency that can't be resolved. So that's something to think about in reviewing the precedence of rules to figure that one out. The opposite ed alignment and the auto sizing, this is one where based on how you're setting things up, you might run into a situation where you're setting the widths based on the panel, but then you need to do a side control, and again it goes out of the panel, is what this is all describing in there. So a lot of details. Definitely come back and refer to this if you run into any particular issues with the relative panel and its positioning of various controls. So for completeness, let's take a quick look at the relative panel application. It's essentially what I've shown, just not quite as complicated. We go ahead and run this, and we can see that we have some controls, and we can kind of drag them around in our control and pick one, and each tab controls one of the controls, and so I can make it align left to the client, change it, make it to the right, make it align left and right. We can make it horizontal in the center, and then go to the button and make that to the right of the edit one and vertically centered with edit one. So again, this is doing exactly what we were talking about. Here's an example. I'll show it here. This is kind of neat that you can also do. We showed a little bit of it with the button and the edits, but anything can span horizontally as well. So we'll put this shape to be below edit one, and we will set it to be align left with edit one, but align right with button one, and so it will make that change. And we can go back to our edit. Where do we put that? Horizontally centered. Let's make that left, and everything moves with it. And nothing real new on the size other than the bordering changes and the various colors. So just what we would expect to have happen in the relative panel. Okay, let's switch over to our final control, the TSplitView. And this is another container control. And the difference with this is that it's designed to be opened and closed. And there's a number of different property values that are available to control just how that happens. So whether or not it's docked, which means that it takes up part of the client area, and when it's closed, the client area is restored back to the main form, or is it overlaid so it rides on top of whatever the client area is. And then when you do close the panel, the split view, is it completely hidden, which is collapsed, or is it part of it still showing, which is called compact mode. And again, where we position it and so forth can all be in play. The easiest thing to do here is to take a look at the application, the demo application first, and then we'll take a look at some of the designer interface. So let me switch over to the split view. Again, this is built in. This is the demo app that comes with Rad Studio, Seattle, and Berlin. So you can go ahead and load this up and give this a try. As you can see, that the split view itself is just this black panel here. And in order to implement some buttons, I've used a T category buttons control to house 3 separate buttons in it. So I have a category menu items, and inside of that I've got my various controls that I can move. So categories are sitting there, and the various buttons and the items have the 3 commands. And so when I invoke any of those, I actually get a little log that shows what's happening. The menu button up here is going to open and close the split view. The way that works is quite simple. If we look at this and look at the event handler, there's an image menu click. If it's open, we're going to make it closed, and otherwise we make it open. So this SV stands for the split view. That's the component that we're working with. The other controls change the various properties. So it's very straightforward. So let's go back into our design time and give this a run. So we go ahead and run. And the menu is open by default in this example. It doesn't have to be. You can actually start it out to be closed. So if I click that menu, that's how it closes. This is in the docked state, which you notice that the client area shifted over. So as I open this up, and it is animated, we control the animation like we did in the other controls. It gives us a nice look and feel for that, very modern. The first change, if we make this overlay, we will see that when we open the menu, it just rides on top of what is currently in the client area. And so that may or may not be what effect you're looking for. You can control that. The second piece is what happens when we have it open and we make it closed. Do we go collapse, which is what we've been doing, or do we make it compact? And that's one of the reasons why you'll see this format used quite a bit, with a large icon and then some text in the expanded view. And then when we go to close it in compact, we still have toolbar buttons available so we can actually invoke things. So if I were to go and I open that up and I click on the home button and the layouts, and I get my events being handled and displayed in the log. Likewise, if I close it, I can still click on the commands. I'm just not taking as much screen real estate as I did before. So another effective way of using that. Some other things that and you can still do overlay with the compact as well. So as you expand it, it just expands in that view. You can control how wide the compact area is. There's a property, compact width. Collapse always means hidden, so that's always gone. Regardless of which way you want that, you can have this go to the right or left. So if you wanted to move that over, you could put that on that side. Typically, you'd probably put everything else over there too if you were going to do it. We can bring that in. Close on menu click is an option to where if I invoke one of these commands, then it will close. So I go ahead and say that, and it closes for me. That's another common technique that you'll see in a lot of Windows 10 applications that make use of the size bar. Of course, we should have full VCL style capabilities, so you can bring in the Iceberg Classico and it will pull up that. This white is actually coming from the category buttons. It's just a little style deficiency that is in the category buttons for that. But if you go switch to say the blue, then it's picked up correctly and has the correct look that we would want to see, and goes ahead and animates and closes just how we would expect it to. So some of the other properties that are listed I mentioned before, so the close style, here's your compact width. You can make that setting change. Obviously you'd want to make that so that your icons or your buttons that you're using would still be visible. If you made that too short, you would clip those, which wouldn't give you quite the effect that you want. Your animation properties are done at the top as well. And your opened width, so you can actually control how wide the component gets opened. So that's another one to be aware of, as well as the open state, so whether it's open or not, and you can set that to design time as well. Again, the location of all the demos are all under the Object Pascal VCL split view. You have that. There's C++ folder versions as well. That is all the information that I have. This is my end slide. My contact information is listed there. If you have any questions on any of those controls, I'd be happy to answer them if I can. At this point, this is the end of the video portion. We will now switch over to the live Q&A. And with that, I will say thank you for watching this video.
So one question here says, for the relativity panel, does the visibility play a part? For example, if you change the visibility from true to false, does that cause everything else to rearrange?
It actually does not, and that is because the way the relative panel sets up is that you build up your relationship to the control. So in the example, there were 3 edit boxes at one point: edit box 1, 2, and 3, and edit 2 is based on edit 1, and edit 3 was relative to edit 2. If you were to hide edit 2 and say visible is false, edit 2 goes away, but it doesn't automatically at this point interpret that to be a dimension of 0. It's certainly an enhancement that could probably be made, which would give you the effect that you were looking for, but currently it does not do that. If you wanted it to, you can programmatically do that behavior. So if you were to hide edit 1 or edit 2, you can adjust what edit 3 is relative to and actually change its below property setting from edit 2 to edit 1. And you could get the effect that you want of the arranging. You would just have to write some code to do that at this point.
Are there comparable FireMonkey controls that work like this for cross-platform apps?
There is an activity indicator like control. It's a little different. Doesn't have the same look and feel to it. There is a T multi-view that is similar to the split view in a high level point of view, but it is structured to be a bit different because of the mobile implications. But that's the near equivalent of that. I don't believe there is a relative panel equivalent in FireMonkey.
Okay. Steven's saying TRelativePanel is just genius. It fixes something that we have to do manually on every form. And if we need to move anything, it's a big deal. Well done. I agree. It's awesome.
Well, that's one of the cool things that Embarcadero is doing, especially even continuing to do with Update 2 and adding the calendar, to the same mix of controls, and not just, letting the VCL become stale. There's certainly, areas for improvement and new things coming, in that area. So very cool to see. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's right. Actually, I didn't even think about the fact that we saw new VCL controls in Update 2, which is very cool as well. Let's see. Comparable. So you asked about comparable controls for cross-platform apps. Not for relative panel, but there is for the split view. It's the and the spinner. Yeah. Okay. Do you know what the foundation or base class is for the relative panel?
I believe it is a T custom panel.
And did you get the download link fixed from your last slide or from your last presentation?
Yes, the link is fixed. I put it into I guess I answered the questions. We could put it in the chat, but the link from the slide does work now.
Okay, great.
I forgot the Berlin in the file name. I just had it as radiantplaylist.zip, and that's why nobody could find it.
Ah, yes. Is it possible to have those add-on properties as in relative panel for our own custom controls? That's a really good question.
Yes, and since the source for the relative panel and other controls that I showed in there are included with the VCL source, you can see how that was done.
Yeah, I remember seeing that, and I was like, oh my goodness, what is this black magic? So I will need to look into that as well, because I don't have a need for doing that right now, but I do recall times in the past I wished I could have done that, and that definitely qualified as
it is a technique that is very cool that is available to really enhance it. It is really what makes this work. You could do the same thing by creating a collection at the relative panel, and you would create a new entry and you would assign it to the control that you want that entry to be managed, and you'd have all the properties in the collection. And that's essentially the equivalent way of doing it, which would be fine. It's really not bad. It just becomes cumbersome to manage. But because the VCL's designer interfaces allow us to have these attached properties, it is much more effective to have them in there. There are some things I think that could certainly be enhanced. In the future, you'll be able to group those better, which would be nice. The fact that they're all at the end is okay because they're all related, and it's really the only thing that's really doing that. So that's okay. But if you were to add more and more things down the future, you could get a little confusing as to what you were editing, since you'd lose the alphabetical sorting when you do that. But
That's true. Follow-up question, or to one of the earlier questions, I guess, if you programmatically change a control's top, for example, does the relative panel adjust it back? Or does it override? So like if it says relative to below something else and then you change the top of it, does the below override that and move it back?
correct. Yeah, essentially was what I was showing in the video, where once I set the relationship and as I've moved the control around, the relative panel snaps that back to where it needs to be.
Yeah, I was really excited. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you can alter it. You can control the spacing between it by using the margins of the various controls. So they come into play and change how the relationship is managed between the two. But you can't just go ahead and move it to some arbitrary space, either programmatically or on the design surface, and have it override.
Okay. That makes sense. I think we're through this. I was just going to add a comment that I really liked the fact that to see the radiant, or the radiant shapes was last session, the relative panel. I was happy to see the relative panel because FireMonkey had all these great new layouts, and I was like, wow, I wish some of these layouts showed up in VCL. And then all of a sudden along comes the relative panel, and I'm like, oh my goodness, now FireMonkey needs the relative panel because this is really cool. So hopefully we can see that, expect to see that in the future on FireMonkey maybe, because it's a really cool control.
Yeah, it's the same kind of principles, and there's certainly things to, as we can go forward and when it comes to layout and positioning and even, responsive design's been a critical aspect of mobile space for quite some time, but it's actually creeping its way into the desktop arena. Not quite to the extent that it is on mobile because of all the various device sizes, but even if you start thinking about Windows, 10's high resolution and high DPI monitor support, that can come into play when you and people dealing with much larger monitors now. It used to be a thing that only developers would have, anything larger than a 15-inch monitor, but that's no longer the case. And so being able to adapt more and have more advanced layout management capabilities in both frameworks is certainly something to strive for.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Ray. Oh, wait, more questions came in.
I see that.
How did the reflective or the relative panel add properties to components at what I would get at one time? Yeah, so Jim, you need to look at the source. Use the source.
So, but I'll extend it a little bit more, because if you at design time, the attached properties get put into the object inspector to make it very easy to get to those. However, if you were to go into an event handler in your code and were to type in button 1 dot below, that doesn't exist. Even though it kind of looks like it should exist, it doesn't exist because the button itself is not being modified. So everything is driven from the relative panel. And in the one portion of the demo, I showed how you go at the control collection inside the structure pane to change the order, for example. Well, that control collection is accessible at runtime. So if you need to make a change dynamically, like the example I was talking about in the answer was to change the edit 3 to be below edit 1 if edit 2 gets hidden, you would go relative panel 1 or whatever the name is, dot control collection, open bracket, the index of the control you're interested in, then you can do your dot and then the properties are there. So essentially, it uses a collection to manage the various controls, kind of like how you would do it traditionally if you didn't know how to do the attached properties. So the attached properties is really a designer capability. And then you go to the relative panel to do anything programmatically at runtime. But that's what for an example of that is to look not at the source of the components, but to look at the source of the relative panel demo, because that's what it does, because it's doing all of those changes dynamically at runtime.
Yeah, actually, I did look at the relative panel demo to see how that worked, because it was, when I first looked at that, I was like, what is this black magic? This totally changes how I thought components behave. Is there any kind of special wrap functionality in relative panel to make things side by side as long as there's space in if the form, and if not, then wrap to the next line? Kind of like the flow panel in FireMonkey.
There is not. My pause was because it's an interesting idea. I mean, it's really a combination of the flow panel concept, but putting it into the relative panel. An interesting idea. There's some added complexities that immediately come to mind with that, but probably something that could be done.
Yeah, cool. That would possibly.
But it doesn't support it today.
Okay, yeah, we got that one. Thanks, Ray. Always a great presenter. I totally agree.
Thank you.
I think at trying to think back to like the first time I went to like a BoreCon, and it seems like you were like one of the speakers that totally stood out as like, wow, my goodness, what a great speaker. So does this...
Well, it helps that I do love what I do. So I'm glad that it comes through, and I do enjoy the ability to share some of this and show just how cool this development tool is, and in each conference, and whether it's a live event or a video one, being able to get in front of people and kind of spread the word is something that I'm very passionate about, along with all the other speakers that are here. So it's a great event.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. So there's another question here. Does this apply to all data components, including grids? I'm guessing it's a reference to have behavior on the relative panel.
So, the short answer is yes. It applies to any control that you can drop into that container. The relative panel will not do anything with the content of the grid. So the relative panel doesn't know anything about what a control does. It is simply managing the positioning and sizing in certain cases, because if you're doing the align to both ends, it will manage that. But it doesn't really know what control is actually being managed. So yes, you can certainly put a grid inside there and put your navigator to be always above the grid and to the left side. So as you move the grid around, the navigator would follow, for example.
Okay. And then another question, I guess, on nesting panels, probably the same thing. The interior panel would not have any context to the parent panel that would not affect the nested, right?
Correct. You could certainly do that, and you can. So you can have one relative panel and then have other relative panels inside of it. The outer relative panel could be used to position the inner relative panel, but the outer relative panel would not have any impact on the controls that were in the inner relative panel. So much so that as you were to go to a component that was in the outer panel or the inner panel, either one of those, and you went to the attached properties to drop down the siblings to be relative to, only the controls that are in the same relative panel would be visible. So you couldn't align, edit 1, which was in relative panel 1, to edit 2, which was in relative panel 2.
Okay. Interesting. Great. Thank you so much, Ray.
You're welcome.
And I guess we're done with Ray today. Are you back tomorrow? I don't think you are you?
I am not. These were the 2 sessions for this year, and I'll say thank you to everyone who's joining and participating in CodeRage again this year. It's always a lot of fun, and thank you, Jim, for hosting all these sessions. I know you put in a ton of hours to pull all this off, so we appreciate that, and I'm sure all the attendees do as well.
Well, thank you. Yes, my pleasure. As you said, it helps to love what you do.
Indeed.
All right.